Dismissive avoidants don't fear intimacy, they fear accountability. When people hear the word avoidant, they immediately assume it is about fear of closeness and emotional connection. But the deeper truth is far more uncomfortable because it is not intimacy they run from, it is responsibility for emotional impact they cannot control. An avoidant can sit in the same room with love, warmth, and affection. They can laugh, share moments, and even create emotional memories that feel real and meaningful. Yet the moment emotional accountability enters the conversation, their nervous system begins to shut down and withdraw. Because intimacy does not demand immediate action, it simply allows presence without pressure in many moments. But accountability asks them to reflect, admit, and face the consequences of how their behavior affects another person. For an avoidant, closeness feels safe as long as it remains passive and unchallenging. They can engage when nothing is being questioned or emotionally demanded from them. But the moment you ask, "Why did you pull away?" or "What did you feel when you disappeared?" the internal defense system activates. This is why they often appear emotionally present in light moments. They can be attentive, caring, and even deeply affectionate in controlled emotional settings, but become distant, cold, or confused when the relationship requires clarity and emotional ownership. It is not that they cannot feel love deeply. They often feel more than they are able to express or regulate in a healthy way. It is that they struggle to stay present when love demands consistency, honesty, and responsibility, because accountability forces them to see patterns they would rather avoid. Patterns of withdrawal, mixed signals, emotional inconsistency, and unresolved inner conflict that they have never fully processed. And facing those patterns means facing parts of themselves they have spent years escaping. Intimacy allows them to stay in comfort without reflection. They can remain emotionally involved without being required to examine their actions deeply. But accountability pulls them into a mirror they have spent years trying not to look into. This is why conversations that require emotional honesty often feel like pressure to them. Not because you are asking for too much, but because they experience self-awareness as emotional threat. And what feels like a normal relationship conversation to you feels like emotional exposure to them. When you ask for clarity, they hear accusation. When you ask for consistency, they hear restriction, even if your tone is calm and loving. And this misinterpretation is what creates most of the conflict in these dynamics. Their avoidance is not rejection of you personally. It is a learned survival strategy to escape emotional situations where they might be held responsible for someone else's pain. A pattern built over time through emotional conditioning rather than conscious choice. And this is where most people misunderstand them completely, because they assume distance means lack of feeling, when in reality it often means fear of being held accountable for those feelings. So the absence of expression is not absence of emotion, but difficulty handling emotional responsibility. The paradox is that avoidants often crave connection deeply. They want closeness, safety, and emotional understanding like anyone else. But they struggle with the emotional weight that connection naturally brings when it becomes real and reciprocal. So they choose situations where they can feel close without being required to stay consistent. They dip in when it feels safe and withdraw when emotional responsibility begins to build. Because consistency is where accountability begins and emotional avoidance starts to collapse. Over time, this creates a cycle where partners feel confused, abandoned, and emotionally drained. While the avoidant feels overwhelmed, pressured, and misunderstood, both trapped in a dynamic neither fully knows how to break. And both sides start believing they are the problem when it is actually the pattern that is broken. The real shift happens when you understand that love was never the issue. It was always the ability to take emotional responsibility for that love in a stable and conscious way. And without accountability, even strong feelings cannot build a secure connection. And once you see this clearly, you stop chasing explanations that were never going to come. You stop overanalyzing silence and inconsistency, hoping it will turn into clarity. And you start recognizing that accountability, not intimacy, was the boundary they were never ready to cross. And if this message hits something inside you, it simply means you are finally seeing the pattern clearly. Not through emotion, but through awareness that brings peace instead of confusion. You stop trying to fix people who are not ready to take responsibility for connection. And you start choosing relationships where consistency is normal